Ben's in Leeds. Ben, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. What a treat to be on. Can I put forward a chapter 12?
Go on.
Joe Public.
That's contempt for the con men, compassion for the con, though, isn't it, Ben?
No, I don't think so. I think I think a lot of people would argue, well, we didn't vote for this if you vote Tory, and I completely understand that view. But I think the sad reality that I'll wake up to on the 4th of July is there won't be in a sort of a Blackadder-esque moment where they announce Tory party no votes.
No.
So there will be votes. There will be really intelligent people that will vote Tory again, and there will be people that look at a couple of Facebook clips and think, yeah, consistency, that sounds good. I'll tick the blue box. That terrifies me, to be honest.
Well, so you look at the figures, and rather than celebrating the scale of the lead, you can't quite believe that there's anybody still saying after 14 years of this, do you know what I really want? I'd like a little bit more, please.
We can't just pin all the blame on the people that we vote for. That's not how it works. And
so we've got to blame each other. We've got to go after our Uncle Keith and our Auntie Doris's Facebook pages.
I would just implore people, please do your homework and don't get taken in by the snazzy suit, even if it's a bit damp.
Yeah, 23%, I think, on the sort of polling of polls at the moment. So it's almost the same as the lead. The lead is 22% on the one I'm looking at.
That terrifies me.
And you're thinking, how can you show me a room with 100 people in it, and 23 of them are looking at what we're looking at and thinking, yeah, I know who I like, I know who I support.
Could I just say I've started reading your book. I don't know if you remember the episode of Friends where Joey finds it a bit difficult and decides to put the book in the fridge because it's a little bit too real. But that's how I felt about yours. So maybe I'll finish it one day.
Nick Clegg.
Go on, because I can see why Mark Zuckerberg might be on the list. But go on, give me the Nick Clegg.
So he obviously got into bed with David Cameron in 2010, yes. The coalition. He then he campaigned on not putting up student fees.
This hasn't brought you. That sounds like a personal vendetta. That not doing student fees has not contributed to the actual seismic corruption of the United Kingdom, Richard. It is not a contributory factor to the breaking of Britain. It's not a question. It's not give me a ring and tell me why you don't like Nick Clegg. So you can go in on the coalition, the decision to go into government with David Cameron. Why is that the contributing factor to the breaking of Britain?
Sorry, so from memory, 2015 election, it was widely considered that it would be just a continuation of the coalition.
It was.
The two manifestos at that point...
Or that they'd lose, actually. I think Cameron was more surprised than anybody when he got an overall majority in 2015.
Yeah, very much so, yeah. So, but going into that, they assumed they might be the largest party and therefore they would need the Lib Dem support again. Manifestos are effectively negotiation documents. And from memory, the Lib Dems had the mansion tax on there.
Well, you're doing it again. Who literally is going to talk about the Liberal Democrats having a mansion tax in their 2015 manifesto as one of the reasons why our waterways are full of poo, why the NHS waiting lists are the longest they've ever been, why schools are creaking under the weight of their own architecture, why the cost of living has been the highest that it's ever been. Do you see what I mean? You sound like you've got a very deep dislike of Nick Clegg, but you're not making it pertinent to the state of the country at the moment, Richard.
Over the EU referendum from the Conservative side, and I think those two would be traded off in a coalition.
I think they were, but that in a way would have turned Nick Clegg into the person that stopped the referendum, wouldn't it? In 2015, if they'd had to continue in coalition, then Nick Clegg's price for staying in coalition would have been no referendum, and David Cameron could have gone back to the Tory party and said, "Oh well, lads, sorry about this, but obviously staying in power and not putting Ed Miliband in Downing Street is more important than your referendum, and in order to stay in Downing Street, we need old knickers on the team, and therefore we're not." So I mean that is a counterfactual. But I don't think Nick Clegg. I certainly wouldn't want to give him a knighthood, but I don't think Nick Clegg deserves to be on the same page as Paul Dacre, Rupert Murdoch, and Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings.
Hi, James.
Hello,
hi, first time on.
You're very welcome.
Love hearing your show.
Thank you.
So really quickly, Rupert Murdoch, number one, hands down. I think what he has done over several years, and I witnessed personally what he did also in America.
Yes.
With his TV shows, his publications, everything. He is number one, hands down, I believe.
If I finesse the question slightly and say, since 2016, does he still come front and centre for you? Because I think personally that his influence waned as Paul Dacre at the Daily Mail's influence rose, and that actually by 2015, 2016, the influence of the Murdoch media was nowhere near as pernicious as it was previous to that, and also, as you rightly point out, in America in the Fox News era.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think it might have waned a little, but personally, I think the damage had already been done. I believe the damage goes back to like 1993, 94 era. And I think that, I think it was over time, what he's done is not only he's kind of blindsided with the media and with TV programs, he's numbed America. He's numbed the not everybody in England, but, hard-working people who are the build of our society.
Yes.
They come home from work, and he's numbed them with publication, he's numbed them with TV, and basically I think that he is a humongous cause of what is going on right now.
I would go beyond... Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, and I do believe that he could have been totally the opposite had he not been as evil as he is.
George Osbourne, I think, has got, and he sits hand in hand with David Cameron.
Yes.
But on the basis that I think that so many of the problems today are a direct result of austerity and the underinvestment in public services, or underinvestment is a euphemism. The child poverty, the crumbling infrastructure, the crumbling schools, hospitals, everything. George Osbourne was the architect of those. And I think they're worse than Brexit. And I hate Brexit.
He gets off incredibly easily, doesn't he, when you think about it? And I'm not entirely sure why, but he really does, because the notion of austerity being something that was necessitated by the economic circumstances is so pie in the sky.
It's nonsense.
It's absolute nonsense. And the destruction of social capital, support for people who needed it most, was deliberately removed by George Osbourne, and did it while smiling. He did it sort of grinning. And the mad bit I realised when I was writing my book was that an awful lot of people voted to leave the European Union as a consequence of austerity, because they felt they needed a change, or they wanted to send a message to the government that was in favour of staying in. But crucially, they thought, well, things can't get... My life has been signally diminished. I'm worse off than ever. My country feels damaged. Successfully portraying the consequences of austerity as the consequences of European Union membership delivered hundreds of thousands of votes to the Leave campaign.
Yes. And he stands by it. When he was interviewed on the Campbell Stewart podcast,
oh yes,
he absolutely says that it was necessary to do. He won't back down on it.
What a snake!
Which implies an ideological, or I don't know,
just arrogance.
So, kind of along the same lines as the last caller, but a bit further back.
Okay.
I think you have to look a little bit at what happened into the election where Gordon Brown lost. And actually, the preceding negotiations that went on, and his inability to put country over himself.
Do you think that's what he did?
I have a lot of time for Gordon Brown. He's a lovely man, genuinely. This is not I don't actually hate him. I think he's a very good person, but I feel like
he fluffed it.
He did.
It was Andrew was talking about this yesterday. I don't know if you were listening. Andrew Marr on the show yesterday was reminding us that when he chose not to go for that earlier election, which he would have won, he actually left the door open for David Cameron and everything that followed. So as a historian, I think you've probably got a point, but as a polemicist, you haven't, because he didn't consciously do any of the things that have brought the country to its knees, whereas everybody else on the list very, very, very deliberately set balls rolling in the direction that they subsequently went. He is an accidental contributor to the chaos, isn't he?
Yes. I think he is. I think it's a shame, like you say, that he ends up being in the same conversation because it wasn't intentional. He loved this country, he loved his job, things like that. But I feel like if he had done some of the things that lots of people around him were telling him to do, rather than kind of making the decisions that he ended up making, it wouldn't have set us on the course that we are on now, 20 years later.
No, I mean, crikey, I guess you're right. If he had won, that's a counterfactual to end all counterfactuals. If he had won that election, and all the clever money says he would have done if he'd gone earlier, rather than doing the McCorba and thinking that things could only get better, things would get better, and we'd go later, then the history of this country would look very, very different, wouldn't it, from 2010 onwards? Yeah, I mean, it's an uncomfortable addition to the list, but it is a contributory factor.
I've got a suggestion for you. Someone who's in the news today.
Yes.
He's never been elected to a British Parliament, although he's represented Britain.
I think you've let the cat out of the bag there, Matt, haven't you?
I think Nigel Farage, even though he's never had his hands on the levers of power, was actually consequential to the disasters that we've had. And
is he a symptom or a sickness, though?
Well, let me put it this way. I don't think they would have had the Brexit referendum unless he had taken UKIP to a level where they were putting such pressure on Conservative MPs.
I think that's true.
That Conservative Brexiteers, as we now call them, were, in a position to put such pressure on.
And the fear of defection was the big driver, wasn't it? Forget that.
John Major, even going back to then. And then Cameron, of course, was forced into having a referendum, which possibly he didn't want. His right-hand man, George Osbourne, advised him not to.
True.
Dare say some of the others, right? Yeah. So that's one thought. And then the other thought is that he beget, in a way, all that came from that. Because you could argue that I don't think it's necessarily likely that Boris Johnson would have become Prime Minister without the Brexit sort of fallout, Cameron's departure and so on. It was a consequence of that. Obviously, what happened with May, you could argue.
And moving what?
But that was all tied to Brexit.
Yes, of course it was. Of course
then
it was.
Boris Johnson, I don't believe Liz Truss would have become Prime Minister if you hadn't had all the situation with Partygate and what happened with Boris Johnson. I don't think she was ever thought about as a sort of next generation.
But by then the landscape was so ridiculous.
So decimated that she emerged out of the wreckage and said, "Here I am."
Yeah.
So I think that's one way of looking at it. It's not necessarily the most obvious one. But
well, he was, to be fair, I don't know when you tuned in, Matt, but he was actually the first name on the list, so it might be the most obvious.
I tuned in late.